Today, my guest is Deborah Ruf, a specialist in high intelligence assessment and guidance for both gifted children and adults. So now I have a couple of questions from the audience. The one is that we already touched on is about a very young gifted child. So we're saying talking 6 years, who feels this devastating internal pressure to solve global issues. So one mom told me about her son who is so preoccupied and worried about climate crisis, the war in Ukraine, the immigration crisis, the nukes, and worried whether Putin's gonna nuke Poland. But obviously, he is not equipped at this age yet with solving these issues.
Equipped?
I'm not, are you? But
Yeah.
anyway, you have this. What would you advise me to? What would you advise that the mother? How can she help her child deal with that internal pressure?
Yeah. If you've read one of my favorite authors when my children were young was Linda Silverman.
Oh, I love her. Yeah.
And Linda talked about that issue.
Okay.
And yes, and it's very common. Certain personalities are more likely with the high giftedness to be really concerned, but it can happen to any personality where they feel this way. And so what you have to do is listen, let them know how you deal with it, because some of these problems will take a long time to solve. And but you can assure the child, but so many of us know these problems. We are worried and concerned too, but because we have more experience and more age and wisdom, we can come up with what we can do. And in my case, we would say, I do this about the climate, or I do this about the politics, and tell your child that unfortunately, it takes, the phrase, it takes a village. We all have our different strengths and weaknesses. And when people work together, each one can contribute something to solving a problem. And then you also need to get into the existential issue for the child. And that's where you slowly but surely, depending on what the child seems ready for, is talk about the cycle of life. We're all born, we all live, we all die. And I don't believe in a cruel creator. And so it's going to be okay. It is going to be okay. But in the meantime, part of what makes life very fulfilling for us is figuring out how to contribute to solving a problem. And so ask him, or her, ask that child, what would you say is the one thing that has you the most interested in solving that problem? And then give them a chance to do more reading on it. And I don't mean, go look at war videos when you're 6 or 7, but to talk about a little history about how people have solved other wars. My child, who had these questions at very young age also, eventually he wanted all the journal books of the Civil War commanders and generals, and he read them. He read disaster books. And then when he had disasters, he was very worried for a while. You talk about the age difference.
Yeah.
We were driving through Chicago, and we lived in a more rural area, so Chicago was a big deal. And we were talking about, he was probably 4 or 5, maybe 6, 4 or 5. And anyway, we were driving through, and my husband and I were talking about, well, should we take a road outside the city and take the long way, or should we take the highway? Well, my son was so worried about going on a highway because he kept, are we going on the highway? Are we going on the highway? And eventually said, why are you so worried about this? He said, well, couldn't we fall off? And so sometimes you don't know what it is that's worrying them the most.
Oh,
And
yeah.
you ask.
It might come, with very vivid imaginations. They
Yeah.
can just imagine what might go wrong, and this is what keeps them worried.
And he was worried about, there was a big flood back in more than 100 years ago called the Jones flood. And it was a flash flood. And so he was worried about flash floods. So you just have to let them talk about what part of that worries them and what can people do and what are people doing to prevent future flash floods.
Mm-hmm.
And that just makes him feel heard and calmed and also inspired. So that's how I recommend that people go at these things about they're not old enough to solve the problems, but
That's very empowering what you are saying, because very often that mom particularly, she said that she was worried that the child at this age has these existential thoughts and issues, and that he thinks about such things.
He's level 4 or 5 probably.
Yeah, but while as a child he should, and then comes this normative, expectation of what children should be doing. He should be playing, and this disproportion between what is actually happening and what the culture teaches us about what the children should be doing is for many parents is really hard to somehow put the pieces of the puzzle together.
When your child is unusual, yes, all the friends around you, many of them are gifted also, but they may not be that gifted.
Yeah.
And so they think it's wrong to even have your child talk about it.
Yeah, and you as a parent probably showed him some, bad images, and this is your fault that he now cannot sleep, right?
And yet, if you have a child who's an existentialist at 5 or 6 or 7, that is an indication of incredibly high intelligence. That's not the same as a child who has heard some impressive words.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would have people come to me and say, well, my son's interested in string theory. No, he's heard somebody say it. It's like there's a difference, because it really, you have to be aware of when they really have a concern or interest, or when they are simply saying what they already saw got them some positive attention.